Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We are exploring the ultimate battleground of the human mind, the tension between profound religious belief in God and Satan versus the secular, scientific, and psychological explanations for evil. From ancient child sacrifices in the Valley of Hinnom to modern exorcisms, and from bizarre geological anomalies to the terrifying Jersey Devil, we are unpacking whether dark forces are real entities or simply human constructs designed to teach moral lessons and keep us in line.
It's arguably the most defining question of our species. How we conceptualize the dark forces of the world dictates how we build our societies, how we enforce our laws, and ultimately how we understand our own internal psychology.
Yeah, exactly. Before we jump into the mechanics of that, I'm going to clearly outline our mission for today's deep dive. We are working from a comprehensive historical documentary transcript that dissects humanity's relationship with the concept of evil. To really understand this, we have to look through two aggressively contrasting lenses. On one side, we have the theological framework, the genuine belief in God, Satan, and active spiritual warfare. And on the other side, we have the atheistic and skeptical framework, which evaluates these exact same phenomena through science, psychology, biology, and sociology.
Which means looking at the exact same historical events and drawing wildly different conclusions about the underlying reality.
Exactly. And I need to explicitly state right up front that in discussing these highly charged theological and skeptical viewpoints, we are entirely impartial. We are not endorsing either the religious perspectives or the atheistic and secular perspectives. We are simply reporting and analyzing the fascinating ideas presented in this material.
Right, just looking at the evidence from the sources.
Right. Have you ever wondered why every culture on Earth has a name for the dark? Well, that is the thread we are pulling today. Also, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the physical origins of evil as a formalized concept.
Yeah, to map the architecture of the devil, you have to look at the geographical locations where these ideas first solidified. I mean, the conceptualization of a localized named evil didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It was forged in very real physical spaces.
And the most prominent example of that being the Valley of Hinnom,
Right.
which is situated just outside the ancient walls of Jerusalem. The Hebrew word for this valley actually evolved into Gehenna, which translates to hell. And when you examine the historical and archaeological record of what transpired there, the translation makes complete sense. During biblical antiquity, the Israelite community was heavily influenced by neighboring pagan practices. They constructed these massive fire pits in this valley for unholy worship.
And the visceral reality of those rituals is staggering. We are talking about an agrarian society operating on the terrifying edge of survival. They genuinely believed that if they did not offer the ultimate sacrifice to appease local demonic spirits, the rains would fail, their crops would wither, and their entire community would starve.
The ultimate sacrifice being
their own children. Yeah. Specifically, the ritualistic burning of their firstborn males. It is a level of desperation and horror that is really difficult for the modern mind to fully grasp.
It's horrific. And the theological response to this practice was seismic. In the biblical book of Jeremiah, God speaks through the prophet with explicit, unyielding anger. The message is essentially a total disavowal. God says, I never asked you to perform this satanic ritual.
Right.
And it comes with a promise of severe divine punishment. So this specific theological dynamic introduces a named entity, Satan, who becomes directly responsible for the abhorrent impulses and the suffering in the world.
What's fascinating here is how we can evaluate this exact same geography and history through a purely secular atheistic lens.
Okay, how so?
Well, the sociological evaluation provides a heavy counterpoint to the idea of a literal spiritual enemy. From the skeptical viewpoint, the creation of Satan and the concept of Gehenna wasn't about a literal demonic entity manifesting in a valley of fire. It was about sophisticated human control.
Meaning the religious clerics of the time recognized the psychological power of that specific trauma and codified it.
Precisely. The atheistic argument suggests that the fear of eternal damnation was synthesized into a remarkably effective governance tool. If a cleric or a ruler needs to keep a sprawling population compliant, moral, and in line with community laws, vague threats just aren't enough.
You need something visual.
Right. You need the threat of an eternity of suffering, modeled after the most horrific, burning trauma the community had ever witnessed collectively, the fires of Hinnom.
So under that secular evaluation, Satan is not a divine enemy. He is the evolution of a storytelling device designed for crowd control.
Exactly. A mechanism to enforce a society's best values by placing a terrifying face on the consequences of human wickedness. The atheistic view argues that humans invented the devil to prevent societal chaos, utilizing the very real horrors of the valley as the ultimate cautionary tale.
Wow. And that structural need for a cautionary tale clearly isn't isolated to ancient Jerusalem. The architecture of the devil is remarkably universal. It transcends geography and singular religious traditions completely.
Oh, absolutely. If you strip away the specific theological names, the underlying function of a centralized antagonist is a constant across global faiths.
Yeah, look at the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
The narrative describes Satan originally as a being of immense beauty and power, an angel who leads a rebellion against God, takes a third of the heavenly host with him, loses a cosmic war, and is cast into hell.
Right.
He becomes a fallen entity whose sole objective is to tempt humanity away from righteousness. He even attempts to tempt Jesus in the desert, offering earthly delights, infinite knowledge, and ultimate mastery over the world. But then you pivot to Buddhism and you find Mara.
Right, the demonic king.
Exactly. The demonic king representing evil and temptation, frequently depicted as a frightful amalgamation of human and animal forms. And then in Islam, you have Iblis, who refuses to bow to Adam and becomes the ultimate deceiver. This singular entity in charge of evil pops up in every major spiritual framework.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the question becomes, why does human psychology demand a physical embodiment of evil? Why is it insufficient for abstract bad things to simply occur?
That's a great question.
The evolution of church art in Western Europe around the 8th and 9th centuries gives us a major clue.
Right, that's when we start seeing the visual prototype of the monstrous beast that we recognize today. The half-human, half-animal figure adorned with wings or horns, usually red or black, emerging from the flames.
Exactly, and that visual evolution is a psychological necessity. Human beings struggle immensely to process abstract moral failure. We are deeply uncomfortable with the idea that the capacity for horrific cruelty exists innately within our own biology. By giving evil a distinct face, a shape, and a title, whether that's Lucifer, Beelzebub, or the Prince of Darkness, we successfully externalize our own dark impulses.
It transforms an incredibly complex internal moral failing into an external tangible opponent. It turns the human condition into a winnable war. Like saying the devil made me do it becomes a protective psychological shield.
And that framework of an external winnable war is exactly what sets the stage for the most intense front line of spiritual combat, the practice of exorcism.
Yes, and we don't even have to look to antiquity to see this war being waged. Take May of 2013 at the Vatican. Pope Francis is in St. Peter's Square greeting thousands of Christians. A video surfaces and goes viral, showing the Pope laying his hands forcefully on the forehead of a man believed to be possessed while reciting a prayer. The immediate global consensus was that viewers had just witnessed the Pope performing an impromptu exorcism in broad daylight.
Yeah.
It is a stark reminder of just how deeply integrated these beliefs remain in modern society.
The institutional history of casting out spirits is as old as written language itself. The historical records show variations of exorcism in the ancient Near East, in India, and in early Chinese dynasties.
Right, and the mechanics of the Catholic rite are incredibly specific. Exorcists from the documentary are quick to clarify that it is not a magical incantation. It is fundamentally a prayer, asking God to cast out the demonic presence. They utilize sacramentals, holy water, crucifixes, rosary beads, and relics. These objects are not viewed as magical talismans, but rather as symbolic expressions of the Church's divine authority, which believers hold as possessing genuine power to drive away unwanted entities. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The physical claims surrounding these possessions push the absolute boundaries of the debate between theology and secular science.
The physical manifestations are definitely where the atheistic and religious evaluations collide most violently.
We're talking about extreme phenomena here. Experienced exorcists report seeing a look of profound localized evil in a subject's eyes that fundamentally alters their facial structure. There are documented accounts of a 110-pound young woman easily throwing 3 large men across her room with inexplicable kinetic strength. And most controversially, there are claims of actual levitation.
Levitation is the ultimate friction point. The documentary highlights that some investigative teams report having roughly 35 credible, salt-of-the-earth witnesses who claim to have seen a possessed individual floating entirely in midair.
Which is wild.
It is. From a strict scientific and atheistic standpoint, this is an impossibility. Levitation violently violates the fundamental laws of gravity and physics. The secular pushback is that unless it can be measured and reproduced in a controlled environment, human perception and mass hysteria are to blame. not a suspension of natural law.
And the religious counterargument leans entirely into the supernatural. Believers concede that levitation violates normal science, but they argue that spiritual forces operate outside the bounds of natural law. They believe dark forces have the inherent capacity to bypass our physical reality altogether.
But if we move past the debate over gravity, the psychological evaluation of exorcism offers an incredibly profound insight.
Yeah.
The practicing exorcists themselves openly admit that their work operates on a dual track. They are addressing the spiritual affliction, but they are simultaneously addressing profound psychological damage. They note that the demonic actively feeds off internal human wounds.
Feeds off them.
Yes, specifically deep-seated unforgiveness, chronic anger, and suppressed trauma.
So the theological framework asserts that unresolved emotional pain is the literal nourishment for a demonic entity.
Exactly. Now, apply a purely atheistic psychological lens to that exact same scenario.
Yeah.
If you strip away the supernatural vocabulary, you are looking at an individual suffering from severe, unaddressed psychological trauma that has resulted in a dissociative break.
Right.
The extreme physical outbursts, the altered vocal cords, and the kinetic strength born of intense adrenaline are all documented symptoms of severe psychological distress.
It is entirely parallel. When an exorcist claims they are starving a demon by forcing the victim to confront and release their deep unforgiveness, a secular psychologist would argue that they are simply administering an intense, culturally sanctioned form of exposure therapy.
The mechanism of healing is identical. The patient is guided through a process of releasing profound internal trauma. The religious framework uses the language of spiritual warfare, while the secular framework uses the language of clinical psychology. They are two entirely different vocabularies describing the exact same human experience.
That is fascinating. So if psychological possession is how we internalize the unknown, how do we handle the unknown in the physical world? When we encounter a geographical anomaly that defies our understanding, do we instinctively project that same face of evil onto the landscape?
We often do.
That brings us to northeastern Wyoming, to Devil's Tower. It is a colossal grayish-green shaft of rugged rock that erupts 900 feet straight into the sky from an otherwise completely flat sedimentary plain. It is so striking that it was designated as America's first national monument in 1906.
The sheer scale of it is jarring, and the name itself, Devil's Tower, perfectly encapsulates that innate human blend of awe and dread. But the most revealing aspect of this monument is the drastically clashing cultural interpretations of what it represents.
Right. The Native American perspective views the formation with deep reverence. To the local tribes, it is not just geology. It is a sacred altar. It is a designated space to seek divine inspiration, to gather empowerment, and to commune directly with the spirits of the natural world. Contrast that with the modern Hollywood interpretation. In the late 1970s, the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind utilized Devil's Tower as the ultimate landing site for an extraterrestrial mothership. The cinematic association was so powerful that tourism to the monument permanently doubled.
This raises an important question regarding our secular evaluation. Is a formation like Devil's Tower a miracle of nature, a supernatural beacon, or just a gap in our current scientific modeling?
Right.
The geological reality requires a tremendous amount of scientific humility. Geologists confirm the tower is composed of volcanic-type materials, yet there is absolutely no other volcanic activity anywhere in the surrounding region. The current scientific consensus is openly baffled. We simply do not know the exact physical processes that cause this massive structure to form.
And because the scientific community says we don't know, the human imagination immediately rushes to fill that void with aliens, divine spirits, or the devil himself.
Yeah, which perfectly illustrates the atheist and scientific mindset. We walk around with the supreme confidence that we have mastered the planet, yet we cannot reliably predict earthquakes. And we still don't fully understand the complex physics of how lightning travels. The skeptical view asserts that just because we lack the geological model to explain Devil's Tower today, it does not mean the formation is supernatural. It is merely a monument to our own limited understanding. It exists to keep our epistemological arrogance in check.
Yeah, the unknown does not automatically equal the supernatural. However, there are instances where human cultures take the unknown environment and project something utterly terrifying onto it. We don't just assign mystery, sometimes we assign absolute horror to a landscape. That leads us into the dense, forbidding 1-million-acre canopy of the New Jersey Pine Barrens.
Oh, the Pine Barrens. Ecologically, it is a primeval environment. The canopy is so thick and the landscape so disorienting that a person can vanish without a trace. At night, the auditory experience is overwhelming. unseen animals moving through the brush in complete darkness. It is an environment evolutionarily perfectly primed to trigger the human imagination's deepest survival fears.
And out of that environmental fear came the legend of the Jersey Devil. The anatomical description is a grotesque amalgamation, almost like an ancient chimera. Local lore describes a creature with a horse's head adorned with horns, a long reptilian or kangaroo-like body, thin bird legs ending in hooves, a forked tail, and massive leathery bat wings.
Just terrifying.
Yeah, and it purportedly emits a horrific, deafening screech.
It is the ultimate visual projection of the untamed, hostile wilderness.
The origin story is deeply rooted in 18th century colonial theology. In 1735, in Leeds Point, New Jersey, a woman known as Mother Leeds was reportedly giving birth to her 13th child. Exhausted and impoverished, legend dictates she cursed the unborn child, crying out, "The devil can take this one." Initially born as a healthy human boy, the story claims the infant rapidly transformed into this demonic beast, violently attacked those in the room, and flew up the chimney to escape into the Pine Barrens.
An atheistic evaluation immediately dismisses the origin story as a biological impossibility. The idea of human flesh spontaneously mutating into a winged horned beast violates every law of biology, physics, and genetics. It is pure folklore. But what the secular lens cannot dismiss is the documented historical panic that this folklore generated.
And this wasn't confined to whispered fireside stories. In the early 1800s, Commodore Stephen Decatur, a highly decorated naval war hero, claimed a first-hand encounter. While testing artillery, he allegedly fired a solid cannonball directly through the wing of the Jersey Devil as it flew overhead, only for the creature to continue its flight entirely unfazed.
The psychological contagion reached its absolute apex during the mass hysteria of January 1909. This was an unprecedented, documented avalanche of sightings that dominated national news across the United States. It wasn't isolated. An entire region went into lockdown.
Rhea.
Oh, yeah. A trolley car in Haddon Heights was reportedly dive-bombed by the creature. Our schools were completely shuttered out of sheer terror. The panic reached such a fever pitch that the Philadelphia Zoo offered a massive $10,000 reward for the creature's capture.
Entire municipalities paralyzed by a mythical dragon-kangaroo hybrid.
Yep.
But the most brilliant sociological detail ties this entire phenomenon together. Long before Mother Leeds and long before the European colonists arrived with their theological frameworks of demons and witchcraft, the Lenape Native American tribe inhabited that exact same area. Their name for the Pine Barrens translates directly to the place of the dragon.
That is the ultimate sociological overlay. The Lenape sensed the formidable, hostile nature of those dense woods and conceptualized a dragon to represent that environmental threat. Centuries later, Christian colonists arrived, encountered the exact same intimidating environment, and overlaid their own cultural blueprint of curses, the devil, and witchcraft.
So the physical environment never changed.
Right, the physical environment never changed. The only thing that changed was the cultural construct used to explain the innate human fear of the dark.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from the sacrificial fires of ancient Jerusalem to the marble squares of the Vatican, from a towering geological anomaly in Wyoming to the terrifying dense woods of New Jersey. Whether you are a devout believer who views the battle between God and Satan as a literal ongoing spiritual war for human souls, or you're an absolute atheist who views these narratives strictly as psychological phenomena and sociological tools used to maintain order, the human obsession with the dark is undeniable. We are a species that simply cannot tolerate the void. We constantly seek to put a tangible face on the things we cannot control or understand.
And if we carry that understanding forward, it leads to a deeply profound realization about our current trajectory. We discussed how exorcists and theologians believe that demons literally feed off our internal wounds, our chronic anger, our deep hurts, and our unforgiveness. If we accept the mechanics of that as true on a purely psychological level, it demands we look critically at modern society. We live in a hyper-connected era, saturated with collective anxiety, where digital algorithms are specifically designed to promote outrage and widen societal divides. If trauma and anger are the food that generates monsters, are we unconsciously feeding and creating entirely new societal demons right now? What will the external face of our current collective anger look like to historians 1,000 years from now?
That is a chilling and incredible thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us and thinking deeper with us today.
It was a privilege to explore this with you. Until next time.